Blackwood. I'm the president of Ralston College, a new venture endeavor in higher education based in Savannah. It's a great pleasure to have you all here with us today for an event that I'm both excited about and which I think is on a topic of great cultural importance. It is my great pleasure to welcome to this series Dr. Andrew Doyle, the satirist, scholar of Renaissance literature, defender of free speech, and I think I'm not out of line to say also my friend. Into this series, Andrew has just written a absolutely fantastic book, Free Speech and Why It Matters. This has just come out last week, I think a week ago today, if I'm not mistaken. In any event, it's widely available. Free Speech and Why It Matters. I was expecting this to be a very damn good book because I know Andrew and admire his work and the subtlety of his mind. But I'm trying to think of an elegant way of saying it was even better than I thought it was. Thought it would be. I think you could subtitle this book "Free Speech: Not What You Thought It Was," for reasons that I hope this conversation will get into. The format of our event today is going to be very straightforward. Momentarily, I'll turn things over to Andrew. He will give us a talk of as long as he likes, probably 20 to 30 minutes or so, shorter or longer as the spirit moves him. And then he and I will proceed to have a conversation back and forth in which we will be hoping that your questions from the audience will play a not insignificant role. So please do submit those questions in the chat. Just a little housekeeping. I feel as though I have to tell you, having played the entirety of that magnificent piece of music, which you'll all recognize, those of you who follow our podcast. I should say, by the way, we're live tweeting and live streaming this event if you'd like to follow us on Twitter at Ralston College. But that piece of music is, of course, by the great Bach. It's the Toccata in Fugue in D minor, played by Gerhard, I guess it is, Opitz. It's actually transcribed from organ into piano. Anyway, I just absolutely love that. And I hope that we're going to get a chance to talk about freedom and the arts in this conversation, which plays a wonderful role. One of the most moving parts of this book is when Andrew talks about that in this terrific book. Anyway, without further ado, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you to everyone at Ralston College, which is an institution that I wholeheartedly support. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this. I did a book launch the other night over Zoom, so that was quite an interesting experience, having this invisible audience that I can't see. But it's good to know that there are lots of people out there, and hopefully we'll have some interesting questions afterwards. I'm going to keep this quite loose. I'm going to cover some of the aspects of the book. But I'm also going to talk a little bit about why I felt the book was necessary to write. I think if you'd have asked me 15 years ago, 20 years ago, whether I would be writing a book about this, about free speech, I would have considered it extremely unlikely, because my feeling has always been that surely in a liberal democracy, the notion that freedom of speech needs to be robustly defended is an odd one, because I took it as a given, I took it for granted. And it's only my reading of late, over the past 15 years, 20 years or so, that has made me realise that free speech needs to be continually defended in every successive generation, and that it isn't something that we can afford to be complacent about. And I feel as though we are reaching a moment where the principle appears to be falling apart, and more people are becoming sceptical about the reasons why we need it. So something's gone amiss, in other words. I say in the book that a lot of people are having trouble putting their finger on what the problem might be. And I put it like this in the book. I say that the culture wars have left a substantial number of us feeling as though we are no longer on secure ground, and that the tremors are too persistent. And that's an idea that I developed, but I think it is this gnawing sense that a lot of us have, that our freedoms are slipping away in this piecemeal fashion. And that's something I want to develop a little bit. So I want to structure.
Yeah, the funny thing about that is that we've never had freedom of speech. We have straw men like yourselves who are being allowed to speak out on behalf of one side or another. But the 7.8 billion zombies are, in this case, what is it, 700, 800 million from your side to our side. What is it, 1.5 million in Canada, 350 million in United States, the rest of the Americas. Then you go back up the other side, and what do you got? 700 million, 600 million, something like that. So everybody divided every which way, and then we get straw men like yourselves, other newscast people, and to fight both sides for us and act as straw men. But as far as the real rights of human beings, we never had them. They were all, when you're lied to about everything, then how can you call that having rights? What, you have rights to live by the lies that are given out, the lies that are told? You're allowed to live by them, but you're not allowed to live by truth or reality or what makes sense. In other words, what we know in our gut is the right thing, so we all go along with it. And then you guys are media people, movies, television, radio, book writers, magazine writers, you name it, internet now. You guys all can come out and say, because you're only being torn down as the straw man, as the example of being torn down and what it looks like to be torn down, right? But in reality, we never had us, the rest of us, never, because we're not programmers, we're not allowed to have freedom of speech anyway. What are you allowed? 3 minutes in front of a school board meeting. You're allowed a couple minutes on a Senate floor, and then if you say something out of character and you don't say it correctly, and thank everybody for offering you your rights. You have these rights. Thank you for my rights. All this respect that you have to have for these fucking losers, right? It doesn't make any sense, but that's the way we do it. And then for you guys to stand up again now, at this side, the conservative side, saying you want freedom of speech, it's just an act. It's just a show. You're going to get the rest of everybody else all upset. Oh, we're losing our freedoms of speech. No one sits back and thinks for a minute, at least not the majority doesn't, and thinks and says, wait a minute, I never had freedom of speech. He did. Jordan Peterson worked for a school, and Donald Trump had all the media he could possibly handle. He, was practically running the newspapers. You know what I mean? He could have all the good press or bad press that he wanted. Which one? It doesn't really matter. There's no such thing. That's probably one of the true statements. That's one of the truths that leaks down between the lies. No such thing as bad publicity. So all of you guys coming out and talking about your loss of freedom of speech, it's just a show. It's a performance. The rest of us, really, if you think about it, we never had it. We should have had it. It should have been a true thing and a real thing, but it's not, because I've been shut down for years trying to say anything in every situation, in every fucking situation, right? They make you go in front of a judge, in front of a court. Judge makes bad decisions all the time based on laws that are lies, falsities, overdone, melodramatic, and overly done with these laws, But no, we're a country of laws. We're a nation of laws, they tell us. Yeah, we sure the fuck are. And everybody just wanted to go along with it on every side. What's the big deal, Michael? What's the big deal? So we lied to you about Santa Claus. We told you the Easter Bunny was a fucking big rabbit that went around and put Easter eggs out there. So what? It was fun, wasn't it? No, it wasn't fun at all. No, because you added up with all the other fucking lies you told. Go trick-or-treating, get the candy, enjoy it. So many lies just behind it. St. Hallows Eve, how evil the fucking holiday is, stuffing sugar in our fucking mouths for the next month afterwards, all the bad things that came from trick-or-treating. Hey, it's just a holiday, man, enjoy it. It's a day off of school. It's a day, or actually, it's not a day off of school, but it's a day to celebrate and all this kind of shit. Get the fuck out of here. And then, same thing with all the other ones, Mother's Day, Father's Day, you name it. Birthdays, for that matter. We celebrate birthdays. I always like mentioning at the wrong time. We should. Jordan Peterson talks about it. The electrical spark, the electrical spark that starts us off as a seed where life really truly begins. When the true creators builders, when the builders first grab onto the carbons that make up who you are, that's your birth, because that's the spark. They grab them, you start using the carbons, build the seed, build what's inside the seed. The seed begins to grow, and the builders are there all throughout our lives. They're right here, right now, building me as I talk to you, building particles of my brain, building particles of my skin, tearing me down, building me up. They're building me. They're always here. Just like you would think of a television screen or something like that. So, anyways, these guys, I'm gonna turn them back on. Actually, I'm gonna not. I'm not. I'm gonna go back to Jordan Peterson again. This is another guy that was talking to Jordan Peterson. He seems like a good guy, but I don't know. He's not on as much stuff as Jordan Peterson is. So I'm gonna keep sticking with Jordan Peterson and do that. But when I hear this kind of stuff, I'm walking by the camera, I'm hearing it, and I'm saying, nah, I can't.
The right to enforce your choice, despite other people's opinions, let's say.
So he's asking, why is there an inherent contradiction in the intersectional discourse? Why is it that racial identity is not malleable, and in fact has to be strictly policed? Hence why we have all these debates about cultural appropriation. Why is that so rigid? And yet, even if the lived experience, let's go back to that, the lived experience of the person tells them otherwise. I mean, Rachel Dolezal wrote a whole book in which she outlines how she feels that she has always been black. It isn't just, I choose to be black one day. It is something, her lived experience is that in essence she is. So why is that to be vilified universally without question, and there's no discussion to be had here? And yet, someone who chooses, in other words, what that gender identity is something that is malleable and open to options, and actually infinite options. Why? And I think
Well,
there is a
maybe he's
contradiction
vilified because he asked a question that's at the heart of the problem with identity politics.
Quite.
Period. It's.
I mean, particularly because when it comes to race, I mean, virtually all intersectionists would accept that race is socially constructed. This is something they're always talking about. And so, therefore, in a sense, there is more of a case for transracialism. If you want to say that that it is an identity that can be mixed.
Well, in some sense, we already accept transracialism as a given, and so here's something, I might as well get in trouble for this. Well, if your ancestry is 95% Caucasian and 5% non-Caucasian, Asian, black, let's say, you're not Caucasian.
Right.
Generally speaking, you can identify with the minority group. And so at some point the question becomes, well, it's a ridiculous question, which is why the whole notion of group identity construed in this way is so pathological. But we obviously accept some degree of transracial identification if your racial group is disproportionately in one category, but you identify with the other, and that's instantly not only accepted, it's standard practice.
Right. And I'm with the intersectionists on this insofar as race, we're all the same. Ever since we've broken down the human genome, we know there are no differences between us. So this idea that it must be so rigidly policed, this social construct, these arbitrary ideas, and yet I think it's something.
Okay, so now we know exactly why Dawkins got himself in so much trouble.
Okay, and
he put his finger. Well, it will, for sure. It's for sure. But the magical super Nazis are always in trouble. So
you are exactly. Exactly. But then, with the question of the gender identity debate, but this is the debate we need to be having. Is that actually the other thing he put his finger on there is that actually people are arguing with different definitions in their heads. For the identitarians, the idea of a woman is an identity. It isn't a biological reality. But for most people, the classification of woman is biological reality, not identity. So in other words, And why is it that we cannot have that discussion? Say, okay, so you believe this thing and we believe the other, and that's why we're at loggerheads. But let's have the discussion. Why can that not happen? Why does it have to be? If you've decided,
that's actually what we're trying to unpack, is what's the motivation at the root of this. And it seems to me, I do believe it's something like a pronounced infantilism. I mean, one of the things I've been toying with is the idea that the demand for gender fluidity in late adolescence, let's say, is something like the consequence of insufficient fantasy play in childhood. That I remember, for example, when my son was little, his sister and her friends used to dress him up as a fairy princess. They did this with some regularity, and I kind of cast a dim eye on that, but I thought it through, and it sort of disturbed me, and then I thought it through, and I thought, wait a second here, leave the kid alone, leave the girls alone. He is playing out what it means to be female in dramatic play, and he needs to do that because otherwise he can't understand what it means to be female. That's how children understand. That's how adults understand things. For God's sake, we go to a movie and we watch someone play out a female, and we identify with that because otherwise we wouldn't be enjoying the movie, and we get a bit of a clue about what it's like to inhabit someone else's skin. So there's this necessity for play in gender roles, and that has to manifest itself. And if the play has been interrupted, let's say, by electronic equipment, for example, or any of the other things that might be interrupting it, well, maybe that desire comes back with a vengeance later. And I have to be whoever I say I am. I have to be able to play with this. And, well, if it's a developmental requirement, there's going to be a lot of insistence behind it. And it looks immature, and it is, because it should have happened earlier. Most people stabilize their gender identity by the time they're 3 or 4. But it doesn't always happen. So there is an infantilism in this demand for fluidity of identity, this insistence that other people play the game that I insist they're going to play.
And then what about the idea that the gender critical feminists would come in and say, well, the idea of a boy dressing up in a dress, there's nothing inherently female about that or feminine about that in any case, that all of this is a construct anyway, and why can't we let the kids just... Some kids are not gender conforming and they can just do what they want. I mean, the concern I have with the current identity-obsessed ideology is that they see a boy in a dress and they will say, well, he could potentially be a woman. And by doing so, are reinforcing the most conservative views of gender to begin with. And that, to me, I'm intuitively against that because I wasn't a gender conforming. I didn't play football with the other boys. I didn't dress up in dresses, but I may have done if they were lying around. I find it very odd that this supposedly progressive radical movement is so dependent on the idea of very, very traditional, unyielding notions of what it is to be male and what it is to be female.
Yeah, but only in the case where the identity is across the sex. So you can be, if you're a man who believes he's a woman, that's inviolable and has a biological reference point. But if you're a woman who thinks she's a woman, it doesn't. It's completely malleable. And so,
well, then, that's an inherent contradiction again, and it's worthy of discussion, surely. And the contradiction doesn't just go away because you won't allow the conversation to happen.
The contradiction gets played out in actuality if you don't allow it to be dealt with in abstraction.
So then the question is, how do we break through? And this is something I've been really, really thinking about. Is that it's no longer just a matter of trying to persuade people. It's almost trying to de-radicalize people at this point. How do I explain to someone the world isn't this fantasy world that you've created in your head where it's full of transphobes and neo-Nazis and all these and good versus evil. The world is actually much more complex and nuanced and requires discussion and thought. How do you break through someone's fantasy so that we can have that discussion?
Well, it used to be that you sent them to the university so they could study the humanities.
That's the last thing you should do now.
Well, that was the answer. That was the whole point, right? To make people more sophisticated in their conceptions. And
In which case,
And,
is it the case that it's over now? If people were to be educated out of those problems, and now that actually the higher education itself has become so ideologically driven that to go to university means you end up more indoctrinated than when you went there, what hope is there? I sound a bit frustrated here, but I feel like I'm bashing my head against a brick wall, because most of the time when I'm caught in an argument with these ideologues, they are arguing, like I say, with a monster they've created in their own heads. I'm not the person they think I am. I don't have the values they think I have. And therefore, the discussion is stymied from the outset. And it does make me very frustrated. And that's probably the real reason I wrote the book, actually, because I want the idea of free speech to be elevated again as a sacrosanct principle, so that we can have these conversations, and so that people don't get demonized and attacked for things they don't believe, and so that we can reach some kind of consensus on these issues that we've been describing, these contentious issues. Because when you have an issue that's particularly contentious, it requires more conversation, it requires more discussion and more understanding, and I don't think we're getting that at the moment.
yeah, well, I guess I'm somewhat optimistic about that, because I can see all the possibility that long form conversations of this sort bring.
Well, there's an appetite for them,
Yes.
isn't there? But is there an appetite for them from the activists and the ideologues who have seized so much control in our major educational
Yes, I
cultural
think so.
institutions?
I think so. I think so. I
Well,
mean, I've been struck by how deep the hunger is for genuine conversation, and very much heartened by it. And so that's a counter movement.
I
Let's
hope
say.
you're right. I just don't see any evidence of that from the people I'm talking about. I don't see it from the people who will say to you,
It's
educate
another
yourself.
problem too, though, isn't it? With Twitter, for example, is that
Right.
it's never the same people, and that plays with us psychologically, because of course we are built to more or less assume that we're interacting with a continuous community,
Yeah.
and we aren't. We're interacting with a discontinuous community on Twitter, and so we're led astray in our presuppositions constantly. And
But it's worse than that. It's like because it isn't. I know it's different people all the time, but they all have the same views on absolutely everything. It feels like you're arguing with the Borg. It feels like just one mind speaking through many voices.
yes, well, it is. That's the hallmark of an ideology. It is precisely that.
And
Then I
that's
guess
frustrating.
it's a matter of trying to understand the ideology ever more deeply to see what it's actually focused on.
But I do read their books, and I do read their articles, and I do try to understand. I don't believe the people I'm talking about return the favour. They always use the phrase "educate yourself," and what they mean by that is read these select books and digest them uncritically. That's what they mean by educate yourself. They don't mean read widely and tackle the various views and come to a conclusion yourself. The last thing they want is critical thought. Critical thought is the enemy. Ironically, it's the enemy of critical theory.
It's a hallmark of white supremacy culture, as far as I can see. Right.
That's
right.
what they say.
But
That's
that's
what they
become.
claim.
It's amazing too to see that set of ideas propagate itself across the culture so quickly. The Canadian federal government, in its diversity, inclusivity, and equity training program, now uses those concepts, like associating white supremacy with punctuality, for example. They use those in the training of their civil servants. It's been accepted wholeheartedly to that degree.
I've seen them. I've seen the screenshots that often get leaked of these training sessions, and bullet pointed hallmarks of white supremacy: punctuality, politeness, hard work.
Perfectionism.
Yeah, all these noble things. And I'm thinking, well, if I was a person of colour, I would be outraged by this. This idea that this is a culture that's alien to me. It's so offensive, and this is.
Well, it's so absurd, even. I mean, it's so absurd that you can hardly mount an argument against it. I mean, conscientiousness is a personality trait, and there's no racial differences in conscientiousness.
Right, it wouldn't matter to me if it was just a few idiots on Twitter or these extreme. It wouldn't matter to me, but these people have disproportionate power, institutional power, political power. I mean, the Biden administration is on side with an awful lot of this kind of stuff, and the end point.
No, so is the Trudeau government. I mean, to have this in the training documentation that's produced by the federal government is just absolutely stunning. It's also the document that I was referring to. I tweeted about it yesterday. Is so badly written that it's stunning.
It's maddening with him. And how is it he's got away?
The thing about conscientiousness in that time, in that timetable that you guys were just talking about, gotta say it again, man. We've been lied to about everything, and time is something else that we've been lied to. We do have a clock that was given to us by the creator slash false creator. It's the moon. I don't know exactly how to use it yet, but I can see obviously that it's used for two reasons. Because the sun and the moon together act as a voltage regulator. The moon acts as a clock, so that we know that the true creator slash false creator did consider time for us, for the bio species. Time was going to be a part of our system, unlike the true creator's build, where I explained to you in the earlier video, time is all one. Time is all one in the true creator's energy. But here in the bio realm, in the conscious realm, the false creator slash creator has given us a clock to go by, and it's the moon. Unfortunately, we fucked it all up. We fucked up the pathway of the moon. We've also misinterpreted what the moon is and think it's some rock that we can go land on with a spaceship and all kinds of nonsensical fictional sci-fi shit. And we've convinced ourselves again by using the imagination, taking advantage of the human population's need and want to be lied to. And we want to be lied to properly so that we can believe our own lies. And time was one of them. So far from what I got of time, I'm pretty sure there's, as far as humans go anyways, there's supposed to be 4 parts to every, and it's not going to be 24 hours either. There's going to be 4 parts. If you take a look at it, and I have not looked deep into it, I just, again, as usual, I just take it as it comes, as I see it. But it is something that I've been seeing here and there and noticing. We were never supposed to be humans anyways. We're for the most part, I can't find any evidence that a lot of us were supposed to be up all night, right? And but some are. There are some people out there who can handle being up all night long. And go back to people that you knew in your life. Some of them that we knew, they could stay up. They would only sleep 2-3 hours a day out of a 24-hour period, and they were fine. They were more energetic than I was, that kind of thing, right? We knew these people. Maybe some had to do with diet, maybe some had to do, but they were pretty much eating the same thing I was. Maybe genes, maybe other things, but there's something to that time thing of when we were born, not 9 months after you were born, when you came out of mommy's womb, but when you were really born. And we don't go by that time anymore. We go by, again, more lies. We go by when you came out of mommy's womb to determine when you go back and use like astrology, when you use astrology to define who someone is and their personality traits and all that, which is ridiculous to do. It's stupid. I've called out other people that were into all that, and I didn't get anywhere with them. But anyway, to stick to the subject, time. So we don't even really know what to do with the time. We don't even know how to really act with what we got here as far as time goes. And there are so many lies to break down, and they're so easy to break down. But what are you gonna do? You're gonna argue with everybody like I'm doing here with you, right? You're gonna fucking argue with everybody. Yeah, you kind of do. You kind of have to. If you, I don't know. I don't even know if it's even worth arguing anymore. But when you go and see it for yourself, then the arguments, you don't care if you win or lose the arguments anymore. Just like I'm doing now. I don't care if anybody fucking listens. I don't care if anybody's believing me. I hope somebody does. I hope somebody goes. But if they don't, it's not like I'm guessing about anything. I'm showing it to you, man. I'm showing you the system. You're just refusing to go look. So time could be broken up to some humans are better performers at certain times of the day. Some are better performers also certain times of the seasons and year. I also noticed we would have pickups and downs and all this kind of thing. It's partly to do with the fact that what energy we were born under, where were we on the earth, what heavy metals and carbons were we surrounded by as we were born? Do we have any of our older selves, in other words, past selves? In other words, were you born of a Jewish religion where they put your carbons right back into the atmosphere within so many hours of your death, of the bio death, of your bio shell? If that was the case, then the energies will just immediately start rebuilding you again. So where you come up and where you're born into, what family, is going to depend on where those carbons are. So do they take your carbons and bring you to ashes and then drop your ashes over the canyon mountain or into the volcano or wherever they're going to drop your ashes? Doesn't matter at all, as long as it goes back to the system. The builders know what to do with the carbons. The builders know what to do with the heavy metals and carbons that make up you, and they will just rebuild them again, and you will come back up. Unfortunately, we've been fucked with so bad when we get to the human realm, when we get to this lie factory, I guess you could call it. It's full of human influence, and the humans have lied to us from the time we were born, from the time we exited mommy's womb, and even before then, because we were already going to the medical industry to get what they call life, as if it's life is all life is credited to the doctor that gave you your life. Look at his shit, huh? Let's see. Pulling on my cord. I'm plugged in because I didn't want to pass up on the day, and I had already made a bunch of videos this morning, so I just figured I'd keep doing these. The day's real good for grabbing everything. Digital collection of electromagnetic nanocarbon from the cloud level.
You know, they're just things that get thrown out there. And so what I wanted to do with the character
Do you know
is...
what slogan means?
What you mean is etymologically? No, I don't.
Sluag Garm. It means battle cry of the dead.
I love that.
Oh, God. That's for sure, man. I mean, if that doesn't send a chill up your back, you didn't understand it.
Well, this is it. I'm going to use that. That's great, because it is a kind of... it's almost like a battleground of zombies who don't have any capacity for independent thought anymore. I mean, you try and get into a conversation with someone like this, and
I have many times.
Well, sure, you
many,
of all
very
people.
Publicly.
And the slogans that come back at you all the time, and the lack of interrogation of those slogans, you know.
But what I find so frustrating and so horrifying in some sense, I mean, I think a great canonical example of that is the interview that Helen Lewis did with me for GQ. Which is, it's now more popular online than the Channel 4 interview, which I think the GQ interview has like 32 million views or something preposterous. But I never did talk to Helen Lewis. I just talked to the ideology. And it's not, I don't like that. I like to talk to the person and find out what they think. But
I heard you saying as well that before the interview, she was very frosty and
yes.
Almost as though she had decided what you were in advance, funnily.
Oh, there was no almost. She definitely decided what I was before the discussion.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
And she's been beating the same drum more recently as well, which has driven many people to the interview. Because she published an article in the Atlantic Monthly and in another locale as well.
So when you're faced with those, I mean, I just see it all the time so often. And to give another recent example, that we had the obviously since the Harry and Meghan interview with Oprah Winfrey, and there was a controversy over here because Piers Morgan, who hosts a show called Good Morning Britain, got into an argument with another colleague on the show, a man called Alex Beresford, I think. And it was really interesting watching. Once they'd had the argument, they sat down, they tried to talk through the issues. And Piers Morgan pointed out that some of the things that Meghan had said in the interview were factually wrong and had been proven to be factually wrong. His response was, Alex Beresford's response was, but that's her lived experience. And then he said, yes, but we have the evidence here that it is factually incorrect. And again he said, but it's her lived experience. So in other words...
See, that's that insistence that the fantasy world, the subjective world trumps everything.
Right. And that once you've... It's almost like these phrases... if you use the phrase lived experience or toxic masculinity, whatever, you're in the club. What you've signalled that you're right. You know, and I know that academics have always done this. You know, the jargon. You're in the group. You're in the in group if you've got the right. If you know how to deploy the right words. But there's something more sinister about this because
you're morally right in these situations. That's
exactly.
the sinister
That's
thing.
it.
Is that
It's morally incontrovertible. You've made the statement, and that's it. And there's no further discussion.
yes, well, you're not evil. That's what you're saying.
Right.
I'm not evil.
So I think so. So the reason with Titania, I wanted her to be obsessed with this language, and why I read so much of this stuff, so that I knew the way that they speak, is because I thought the best way to expose the inherent contradictions of that position and the thoughtlessness, moreover, the thoughtlessness of that position, is to embody it in a character.
Right. So you were playing a dramatic game, essentially, which is a form of thought.
In doing so, I've actually come to understand the people I'm satirising a whole lot more. And look, let's face it, every now and then they'll hit on a point that is actually right. And you know, even when I read White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, which I think is a terrible book and is so flawed throughout, every now and then she'll hit on something and you think for a moment, oh, there's something in that. And then she'll undercut it by saying, well, everyone's a racist and all the rest of it, you know, and it just goes back to being absurd. But, and that book in of itself is a very good example of this, you know, setting up a reality that cannot be penetrated, because she will say that any kind of critical questioning of her position is evidence of the very pervasiveness of white supremacy that she's identified. So you can't win, because even engaging in a discussion is proof of your malevolence, according to her theory. It's absolutely hopeless. But I thought because the movement is so riven with contradiction, actually the more effective way of tackling it isn't through dialogue. Firstly, because the people I'm talking about are impervious to reason. They mistrust dialogue. They see debate as a form of violence. So you're never going to get through to them that way.
Yeah, and that's actually an explicit part of the theory.
It really is. So then in creating a satirical character...
Right, it's not that they're anti-free speech. There's no such thing as free speech in that theoretical framework.
No,
it's a misapprehension all the way down to the bottom.
Which is why I get so frustrated. I've often been in debates where I've tried to invite these very people to participate in the debate, to hear them out. And they would say that to even appear would be to dignify the position. So it's an absolute nightmare. And it also protects themselves from potential criticism, which is, of course, the whole point. But I thought by creating a satirical character that embodies those contradictions, that thoughtlessness, it might reflect back onto them I suppose how they look to normal people. Because I don't think they appreciate, I think they're so caught up within their own little bubbles, with their own little groups, they never hear an alternative point of view. I mean, I used to work with academics like this who were so within their little groups, and they're constantly quoting each other and supporting each other and giving the illusion that their views cannot be disputed. But what if you're suddenly confronted with how other people perceive you? And will that give you pause for thought?
Okay, so when you started Titania, you didn't announce that she was a satirical character. You started playing on Twitter. Tell me the story. What happened? Because that Twitter account became extraordinarily well known and very rapidly. So I'm curious about how you did that and how you responded once it started to, amass some cultural significance.
I was very surprised that it took on. It became so popular so quickly, and I'd started it because more to entertain myself more than anything. I was so frustrated with this, and I wanted to try and expose the absurdity of it. I mean, my background is as a stand-up comic, and as a stand-up comic, I'm not necessarily satirical. I will stand there on a stage and ridicule the thing that I perceive to be a problem with society. With satire, what you're doing is you're often embodying it with a kind of ironic detachment, or you are, you're addressing it. You're always going after what you perceive to be the vices and follies of society, and I thought that was a good way of doing it. And
right, so you had to stay on a kind of edge. You had to be believable enough as the character,
right,
so that you could pass, but you had to push it just past the point of what? Of rationality or believability? It's a funny edge.
I was continually getting into arguments with people and staying in character. I've always stayed in character, and even to today. And I've actually, if you go to the Titania account now, my pinned thread is a thread of conversations that I've had with people in character who are angry about the things I've tweeted. And these can go on for pages and pages, and it's fascinating to me because it's close enough to the truth. She says really ridiculous things, really absurd things, like speaking or writing in English is an act of colonial violence. She'll say that, you know, the only way to guard against fascism is if the state are allowed to arrest people for what they say and think. You know, stuff like this, which is so obviously absurd, and yet it's close enough to what people actually say. That people believe it and get annoyed about it. And what I've always liked to do is to stay in character and have those conversations with these people, and then I posted the screenshots of the conversation. So, but part of the point of that is not to humiliate the people who had fallen for it, because actually the point I'm making is I understand why they would fall for it, because it's so close to what people actually say, and by doing that, my hope is, I suppose, that it exposes the folly of this stuff. Sometimes, even when I'm in those arguments, I will say something that is so out of you know, just completely out of the realm of possibility, so stupid, and yet they still don't. Things have become so absurd that they don't twig. I mean, even today, there was a story today in the UK. A museum, a Jane Austen museum, is now going to interrogate Jane Austen's use of sugar in her tea, because it has connections to plantations and white supremacy and slavery. You know, something like that, which is just so absurd. Or the recent controversy over Bluey, the Australian cartoon dog, because it doesn't have enough dogs of colour and gender diverse dogs in the cartoon. Now that sounds like something I would make up as a joke. But it's real. It's actually happening, and people are taking it seriously. And so therefore, in a sense, it's become harder with Titania, because anything that I come up with is going to be topped by real life very, very quickly.
So what have you learned about the people that Titania annoys? So she's a hyper-politically correct avatar, but she tangles up people who are opposed to that sort of thing. And so that must have also shed substantial light for you on people on the other side of the...
It does.
And so what have you learned?
Well, one of the things is that the people on the other side, who might even be quite, might even be of my opinion about these things, a lot of people are very quick to anger, and verbal abuse as an instant response. So a lot of the people who get angry with her really go after her looks, and I mean, she's not real. A friend of mine, Lisa, created the image of the woman. She's a composite of 4 different women, so it's not a parody. You see, this is the thing, it's not a parody of any particular person, it's a type of person. And yeah, the people who get angry with her, and the people who are genuinely angry about the social justice movement, are absolutely furious about the way it is impinging on every aspect of their lives. They are sick of it. So when they see someone as extreme as Titania, they really let rip. And I don't think that's healthy. You know, it's not in my nature to go and abuse someone online or to get angry online. But I've seen the extent that what it shows, I suppose, is that kind of instinct to immediately go for the abusive or the vicious or the attack or the ad hominem is present across the political spectrum. It's everywhere. Or maybe that's just a sign of Twitter. Maybe that's just a symptom of social media. And I've learned a lot about how social media works. I think that's another thing about it, is that I've really, for one thing, the fact that she's been banned a number of times, and I've learned how to avoid the bans, and about the way that big tech censors and how they censor and why.
And what is she being banned for?
So the tweets that she was banned for, a couple of times she's had a number of 1-day suspensions, a number of 7-day suspensions. Once or twice it's been inexplicable to me why she would be banned. It seems a bit like someone at Silicon Valley has twigged that their precious ideology is being mocked and they don't like it. That's the only explanation I can think of. However, on a couple of instances, it's when she's, I suppose what they would say, incited violence. And of course she hasn't done anything of the kind. There was one tweet where she said she was going to go to a UKIP rally. UKIP is a right-wing nationalist political party in the UK. And she said, I'm going to go to this UKIP rally to punch people in the name of compassion or love or something like that, you know, which is the idea that a lot of these activists have, that actually, whereas words are violence and awful, actual physical violence can be defended, you know, in their view. It's so perverse. And of course I was making a comment about the perversity of that idea, that you think microaggressions are actual violence, but you're perfectly content to go out and set fire to cars and beat people up if they have the wrong opinion, or pepper spray people in the face if they voted for Trump. You know, there's an obvious contradiction there that I was trying to expose. So she had a ban there. I think that might have even been the one where she was permanently banned. I had an email from Twitter saying, this is a permanent ban, you're not getting back on. And then there was a bit of an outcry from people who follow her, some prominent people who follow her, and Twitter changed their minds and brought her back. And as a result of that, inevitably, her follower count leapt, because of course when you try and censor something, you draw attention to it. But you're always treading a fine line. I mean, my friend Lisa, who I mentioned, Lisa Graves, used to have a Twitter account called Jarvis Dupont, who is one of my favourite accounts on Twitter, and he was banned, completely permanently banned. They actually went on a bit of a purge of satire accounts. There was one afternoon where Twitter purged 12 or 13 satirical accounts and deleted them. Titania came back for some reason. I think it's because she was the bigger account. But a lot of them just got ditched, and that, I think, shows that, you know, the powers that be at Silicon Valley, they don't like to be mocked. They don't. Well, no one in authority likes to be mocked. It's the best way to undermine authority, isn't it? And it's why every despot in history has killed the clown.
Well,
You know,
that's why we have to be so careful when any of our laws start making comedians nervous. They're the ultimate canary in the coal mine.
And I'm
Even
worried
more
that,
so than artists, I think. The artists are next, probably, but...
absolutely. I mean, you'll know in Canada, Mike Ward was fined, I think, $42,000 by the Quebec Human Rights Commission for a joke that he told. And by the way, you know, this
Yes,
is not
and Montreal, of course, has one of the world's great comedy festivals, and some of that humor, I've been to the comedy festival a couple of times, and at midnight you can go and hear particularly outrageous
Right.
comedy, which I actually think it was one of those where he said what he got fined for.
And I don't even know the context because he said it in French for one thing, so I didn't fully understand. But I read the transcript and I spoke to him about it. And what was interesting is that he's not some, you know, open mic act who hasn't been on the set. He's an established, famous, successful comedian who was fined for a joke that, if you actually break it down and analyse it, there's nothing remotely offensive about it. You know, I mean, it's perfectly possible.